So I guess today I just want to make a multiplayer 3D template or a 3D multiplayer template using Godot as a kind of a starter project for people that just want to see what that looks like. So I'm going to start from scratch and I'm going to try to piece together just the really basics, establishing, a client server setup and using the built-in eNet infrastructure or APIs that Godot provides out of the box for creating a server and then connecting to that server with some clients. Just going to be testing locally, although this could be used in a dedicated server setup. We might look at adding some characters and moving them around, I guess, with some little bit of animations. And I was thinking about adding NetFox, which is going to enable the ability for some lag compensation. So let's just get started. I'm just going to create a new project. Godot 3D multiplayer template and -1, just in case I want to do another one. And let's create and open that up. Just get some set up here. There's my stats. See how bad my stats are. My streaming stats. This is my first stream on Twitch in a really long time. So just trying to get my bearings straight with it. All right. Anyways, so here's our empty project. And so this is going to be a 3D project, but we need to create some scenes. So let's just go down here, scenes, and let's create scripts. I'm actually going to open up something as a bit of a guide for myself so I don't get too far off track. There we go. And I also want to do an assets folder, put our models and such in there. And let's also grab a reference to the logos and stuff. Just want to go through the basics. So let me try to drag this down there. This is going to be our logo, so we can remove this icon. And I'm going to also add the splash screen. And then to edit those, go under your project settings, and I think boot splash. I'm going to select this, I make bad games. And then the icon is pretty close by right there. Knew it was somewhere there. All right, and we also need to create a main scene. So let's just make, not a main scene, but I would, what is it? I guess main menu. Let's just do user interface. And then we'll just save that as main menu. And we'll put that under scenes. And that should show up right there. Excellent. All right. So if you go to the project settings, there's some window configurations that you can set for, do you want the game to run in window mode or full screen and that kind of thing. I'm going to keep it in window mode. But the default one's kind of small, but let me just run it really quick and see. Yeah, let's just make that the main scene. That's all that was. So this is what we're going to start with. That's fine. I think this is just going to make development a little easier. But what I'm going to do is tailor the main menu to work in this screen. And then as you want to expand your game screens to full screens, you can do it in such a way that it should expand to it. So I'm going to try to do that. So let's go over here and let's just add a panel. And I want to add a background texture. So let's just do a texture rectangle. And we'll just say menu background. And I also know I'm going to add another panel, and we'll just call this order matters here. So we have to make sure I don't mess up the order. So this is going to be the menu, and we're going to put some buttons in there in a second. But first, let's look at this control, and let's change my layout to my bad layout. I don't like the inspector over on that side. I like everything over here, and that way I don't have to keep tilting my head back and forth. I'm not really sure why. That's kind of the default setup. Let's see, what I want to do is select that. and we can go to layout. And I think full rectangle is exactly what we want. And then this panel, well, what is this? This is going, yeah, this will be full rectangle as well because it's our background image. Just dragging that under the assets top level. And I think what I can do is drag that right up into our texture. Yeah, there we go. I think we can, do I want to keep centered? Fit width? Is that what it was? No, that's not what I want. Yeah. And if I kill fit width, yeah, it makes it too big. So let's fit width and then it should just work. And then if we run it again, we should get a background image like that. So it's kind of weird because it's not scaling with it. So let me see if I can adjust that. Oh, and there's a way to keep the debug menu on top. And I really like doing that so that when you're editing the menu, we can see it in real time. I think we just search for top, always on top. There we go. Window. No, I don't want to keep centered. Full rectangle, fit width. Let's just remove fit width for a second. See what that looks like. I mean, it's okay. And I think that you can adjust this depending on the window size, or just make a background image that doesn't really matter what it looks like when you stretch it out. But for now, I'm just going to leave it at fit width, and then we can look at the menu screen. Add a couple buttons. I think I'll need 3. Just going to stub out a couple just in case. Actually want to create another subfolder called UI, and let's just move that up in there, and it should carry over. Okay, it does. Good. And while I'm on that, I have a text or a font type I want to use for this that I grabbed off one of the open font websites. And I think we can also create a theme. So let me just drag in that font here. And let's go ahead and create a new theme. I think it's going to be resource. I think I can do it this way. Yeah, let's do it. Create a new theme. And then we'll just call it game or menu theme. And then for the button, let's just say host game for now. And then if we set the theme to the one we just created, should carry through. Also, let me do this. Don't want full rectangle. Yeah, we don't want that. Just do center. So for the theme, if we select the theme, let's come down to our button. So I think you just select the button and then we can add. I always forget all the little intricacies of this, but we'll get it in a second. Do I do it this way? Yeah, there we go. Anyways, I'm going to move on from that because I'm pretty sure that this is going to work. If we go back to our button, it does have it selected. So we can just say host game and you can see our font showing up fine. But I also want to increase the button size. So let's just make it like 32 for now. And I think that should be enough to get started. And we also don't want to show the background. So I'm just going to make it flat. So our buttons are going to just look like they're see-through. I kind of hate the background. All right. Actually, let me do this instead. All right. And then we can use this for development. And then as you get into your world, when you set up your world, you'll be able to change these to whatever the menu items you need. And let's just move on from that. So this will be our main menu. And I probably should put an exit game option on here. So let's just do that. And of course, we can just move that wherever you want it. And that should work. All right, so we have let's just name this main menu scene. And we need to create a script that will handle that. So let's just come down to the scripts. Let's say new script, main menu. It defaults to the scenes because that's where we started at. And let's just hit OK. Let's get rid of these for now. And then for now, let's just do host game join game. And then exit game. Okay. And exit game is just going to be get tree dot quit. Nope. With no problems. So when we don't have an error code, we click the exit game button, should exit normally. And then join game. Let's just do a print debug statement. And then copy that up here as well. And then let's just wire them up really quick. So we can close the panel, host game node, button pressed, pick, host, done, join game, pressed, pick, join, and then on exit. And then if we test those out, should be able to print host game and join game, and then exit will actually kill it. So perfect. And I probably should have done this as soon as we open the project, but now that I just remembered, if you're working on your project, and regardless if you're working by yourself or a team, I would get in the habit of using Git to manage the source. So I'm just going to create a repository really quick and do an initial commit at this point because I want to be able to capture that initial state of the project. So I'm just going to add I use source tree. Use whatever you want. There's a bunch of them out there. I think GitHub Desktop is another big one. Or you can just use Git from the command line if you'd like. I find it a little easier to use it in source tree. And like you'll see, this is my source tree menu. So I don't have any branches here at all. So there's a git attributes file and a git ignore file that are default with this, and that's fine. So I'm just going to commit all this with the backgrounds and everything that we just added for the main menu. I still don't like our game background. I'm going to change it later because I just don't want to waste more time on that right now. But our git attributes is pretty basic. I have another version of that I'm going to copy over from another project that I was working with. Let me just do that really quick. And I think they were PNGs, even though they don't have to be. Yeah, they were PNGs. Splash screen, PNG. Cool. And let's go back to source tree. And we'll put in the new git attributes and then just update those changes. So that should be our initial commit. Let me just pull this off screen really quick. Just type in initial commit. This is what it's going to look like when I create a new branch. And I'll just go ahead and hit create branch. And then any subsequent changes will show up here. All right, so we got our button set up. And we can, let's look at creating the basic transition to the main game scene. So we don't really need our UI folder open, but let's create I think I just want to call it game scene. So You could put a loading, I guess a loading scene in between the main menu scene and the game scene, or a matchmaking scene. So you have, right, so you would have this scene here, and then we can create a whole other scene that represents the matchmaking process in your game. So if you didn't want to if you want to just say like find match instead of join match, you could do that here and then just bring them to another scene where you handle that, and you have scripts to manage that, the UI for that scene. And also behind the scenes, you would have a network manager or matchmaker script that would handle the connections to that matchmaker server, or however you're handling that. I do have a couple videos on that if you want to check those out. They're a little advanced, but if you're looking for something like that and you're ready to get started with it, totally use it. There's also like open matchmaking, as I think that's the name of it. It's like an open source version of it, service. You can download it and host it yourself, or I think they have a paid service that, software as a service kind of thing that you could, or platform as a service, whichever category it is. And you can use that if you'd like. It's up to you. Or if you want to just write your own matchmaker, go for it. There's a few options out there. I'm actually going to be covering that. I'm going to be covering one of those services soon. Probably the next month or so. Keep an eye out for that if you're interested. And let's see, what can we do next? For this template, let's just create another scene, and we're going to call it the game scene. And this is going to be a 3D scene. Yeah, so I don't technically think we need to create a 3D top level scene. I think it could just be a regular node, and then in the node, because everything extends from node. But I'm just going to leave it a 3D scene for now. And let's see, what I want to do here is, we know we're going to have a world. So let me just add another node, 3D. Let's call that world. And then we can change it as, I guess if we feel that, like, I'm just going to start. And then if I come back to these things and realize that they're really not the best naming convention, we can always come back and change those later. And so that's going to be world. And in our world, we're going to have I guess we're going to have a map spawner. So let's just say this is going to be a node 3D. We'll say map spawn point. Yeah, I think I can just add another node for now, and we'll just call it player spawn point. And then so this will actually hold the map. So I need to have a script that kind of puts this all together. Let me see. So if we go back to our script, I need to kind of start piecing this together a little bit. We want to be able to go to the game scene. So let's just create a constant game scene equals res colon, and then it should be scenes. And then we'll do game scene. And we just want to load that scene. I don't know why these connections aren't showing up. I think there's a bug with that. Like, even though these are connected, they're not showing. What's the problem? Not even paying attention to what I'm typing. So if I hit, it should just take us to the next. Yeah, so it takes us to the main scene. And if you check the remote tab, you'll see we're on the game scene now. And there's our map and our player spawn point. All right, I think that makes sense. All right, so we're going to transfer to the game scene, and I want to be able to drop in a player. So I know I'm going to have a bunch of stuff related to the player. So let's create a folder called player. And in there, let's just create a new scene. He is going to be a character 3D body, not 2D. Let's do 3D. And it's going to be a player object. And it wants a collision shape. So yeah, I guess for now, let's just do a capsule collider. Right. And then I'm I plan on adding a actual character, but for now, let's just add a, what is it, a static body. I think that's what I want. Is it static body? No, it's a mesh. I want a mesh. And we're going to create a typical little capsule guy. And he needs to come up to the top. And then the collider, I'm not going to leave it a capsule very long. I just need to make sure that things are making sense. You know, why go so far and develop out your player and put in the animations and the meshes for your player object and all that stuff before you even know you can spawn them in the world? So people ask all the time, you know, can we bake in our multiplayer stuff after the fact? Yeah, sure. I really think it's going to be a lot more work to do it that way, because you don't even know the setup. I think the structure and the approach and how you put together a multiplayer game is going to be slightly different, or a lot different actually, than maybe a single player game, because there's a lot more considerations to make. So I would recommend just building a template, just kind of like what I'm doing, to just get the flow of your game working first, right? That's all we're trying to do here. Let's just get the flow of the game, and then you can worry about adding in all the fun details and that kind of thing later. I think it's pretty straightforward. I think what I want to do is I want to create a manager that handles connecting to the game, or handles creating the server and also handles joining as a client. But I've done this several times, and I'm just looking at how I was doing it before, and I'm thinking maybe I want to approach it a little differently. Yeah, I think maybe let's try to load in. Let's try to make the world dynamic. I almost wonder if we should wait for the connection to be established, and then we load in the next scene. Like maybe not do this right away. You know, like let's actually wait till we have our connection before we move the player to that scene. Or maybe we can have like a loading scene in between. Maybe that makes more sense too. Um, so that you see, yeah, I think I like the loading scene idea, because then you have that feedback, that user feedback, that something's happening. So let's look at doing that. I kind of like that idea. Okay, so I want to just create another scene. Let's call it loading, and it's going to be a 2D scene. I'm sorry. No, it's going to be a control. And just stick it down. Yeah, okay. So then let's go over to that tab, and we can just do a layout adjustment, full rectangle, and then we'll do, let's add a panel. And then I want to add a label to it. We'll just say connecting, you know, whatever. And I think I also want to change the layout of this. And then this guy, I think there's a way to center it. Go down to layout mode, and we can kind of just center it right there. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, and I want to apply the theme. Let's see if I can actually do that. I don't know if it's going to affect it because we didn't add it to label, but yeah, it looks like it does. So that's the default thing. Okay, so it's actually centered. Looks a little off. Like, let's just move it up. And I'm gonna and if you want to override, like if there's like the default text is 32, but in this case, I'm just gonna make it a little bigger and just kind of, all right, that looks pretty good. And maybe to make this a little nicer, let's add another texture rectangle. I've got one in my history right there. And let's stretch it out. I think I can do, Oh, let's just load in the same image. I think, where is it? Oh, I closed it. Okay. I think we can just use the same image for now. And we will not do that. We don't want to do that. Is that what I did with the main menu scene? No, that's not what happened. What's going on? I think I had another setting in here, or was it? Oh, maybe I did fit with. Is that what I did? Okay. All right. I guess that makes sense. Okay. So, and then I think I just need to change the order. All right. So, and then now that I did that, it might look better to just kind of keep things off to the left. And then if you want to add like some cool text, like every game has their like tips or whatever, you can just add the loading tips over here. All right. I don't think we need to do anything else. So I think we're good there. Now that we have a loading scene, what do we do at this point? So there's two ways we can do this. So we're going to go from this scene to the game scene, and we can just add it here because we created a scene, right? So we can just say, here's your loading scene. And just kind of cover everything. And then when you're done, just it would go away. But you know, I think I'm just going to start with that just to keep it simple. So let's close loading. And if we go back to here, we're going to load the game scene, and that by default is going to show that. Is that, I'm just trying to get my bearings. Yeah. So if I do this and host, yeah, it'll say connecting. And then now we're in the game scene, but we just have this nice little splash screen that we can show until we've been able to establish a connection or until we've been able to create a host. Like when you're doing this locally or on a LAN, it's probably going to be immediate. So this whole loading scene is kind of silly to do, but I think it's just a nice way to hide, other than instead of just showing your world or whatever you want to do, you can just show this instead. Like World of Warcraft, any really game that you have like a world that you're trying to load into, they're going to have this loading scene while the game can start loading in all the elements and spawning all the things inside the game. So I think you can even detect that kind of stuff. I'm not going to cover that in depth in this one, but once we've had established a connection and you know we've loaded our players, and I think we'll be able to just remove that loading screen, and then boom, the world will be there. So let's go back to the game, and I'm thinking that we need to add a networking autoloader that will kind of handle this stuff for us, because the autoloader will be at the top of the scene. Like when your game's actually running, it gets stuck in the top here, so it'll be like right at the top of the game, and those things load first. So we'll have access to the tree, so we should be able to grab a reference to that loading scene and hide it once it's complete. So I think I want to create a script for the networking, and let's just make that an autoloader. So let's go down to scripts, and I think we should create a folder. Do I want to create a folder for the network? Yeah, let's create a folder for network. And in there, we'll just create a new script, and we'll call it, what do I like to call this? I think it's network manager. Yeah. And we're going to be using enet for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and pre-create a script called enet enet network, because that's the type of network we're going to use. And I don't know, I think the way that I've been doing this lately, if you've watched any of my past videos, that I was actually programming the ability to switch between enet and a Steam network. So if that's something that you wanted to do, then by all means check that out, and you can see what I mean by that. So if you if you want to do local testing on eNetwork and you want to use those high level APIs, there's some extensions you can use on top of the Godot Steam plugins that'll still be able to use those APIs, and that could be kind of nice if that's what you want to do. So let me see. Let's where did I leave off? Go to project settings, and we're going to create an auto load out of that node that we just added. The network manager one, that is. And let's add that. And then we're just going to enable that. All right. So when you run your game, if we go to remote, it's there already. So when I hit host, we'll be able to call to it just like you would, just however way you want. So let's just do that. So let's call network manager, and let's say host game, and host game is, let's see, where is it? I didn't even open it. There we go. Okay, so let's just say function host game. Actually, let's just do a debug statement. And I know I'm going to have another one in here for join game. You don't have to do all these print statements. I just like to do it just in case I need to, if you change some of this wiring, like if you don't want to go from the main menu scene to the game scene, and you want to change the order of how all this is set up, it's kind of nice to see what, it's nice to just see how those things would track. So let's also do this. And I think we also want to do the game scene on that as well. And instead of host, we'll just say join. All right, so we're going to change to the game scene. I don't even have a script or anything on the game scene yet. I don't know if we'll need it yet. Let me just hold off on that. And then here, all right. So the first thing we can do is show our loading screen. So let's create that. I like to prefix what I feel should be private, or private methods to the class. In this case, show loading might want to be called from other locations, so I'm not going to do that. And I know there's kind of a Godot standard for adding an underscore in front of variables that are reserved for like lifecycle, like ready, physics, process. But I don't know, when I read the documentation, the best practices says, like, if you want to mark a function that is private to that class, it's not technically private, but if you just want to organize it that way, go ahead and stick an underscore underneath it. But for this one, I don't think we need to do that. Show loading, because I might want to be able to call this show loading function from other areas in the application. Okay, so show loading is I guess I need to get the tree. So get tree current scene. I think it's get node. And we'll say loading. C-E-N-E. And let's just make sure we show it. And then we're going to have a subsequent, I probably should stick this in the top or the on ready. Let's just create another scene or another function to hide it. Hide loading. And I know it's shown by default, but I want to get in the habit of just making sure that we call to show, because like I said, if you change the order of these things and you end up calling this in a different order, I wouldn't assume that it's being shown. So that's why I'm doing that. And we'll just say hide. And I don't really want to grab this each time, but for now, let's just leave it alone, and we'll see if, yeah. So we know it'll work. I don't see any problems with that, but we can just test it really quick. It's not going to change anything, except it isn't there. Yeah, because the load it hasn't had a chance to actually load yet, because the scene transition hasn't happened. So we can also approach it from a different way where we manually add it. So we can do it that way. Maybe that's a better way to do it because I don't think we're going to have access to it. So maybe let's do it that way instead. Okay. So again, I want this to be private to the scene. I don't really need other people, need other scenes accessing this. So let's just preload that scene. Loading, there it is. So we're going to preload that scene. Let's get a reference to it because I don't want to have to keep trying to search for it. So I think it's active loading scene. And what we'll do is we'll say, let's just instantiate it down here. Can probably get rid of that. Right, so we'll have access to it. And then we need to add it. I think we need to add it to the scene itself, to our game scene. And then to remove it, we can just, or hiding it, we're just actually going to remove it. Let's remove it and then queue free it. Free up that resource. Let's just check this. It's going to work. Yeah, it looks like it worked. Well, hold on. We might have two of them. Yeah, so it just added it twice. Let's not do that. So let's just remove this one. And let's try it again. So we hit host game. It's going to call to here, and it's just going to instantiate that loading scene that we created earlier, and it's going to add it to this game, and there it is. And if you want to check what that looks like, it just added it under the network manager. If you wanted to add it to a different place, I guess you could have a placeholder, or if you don't want to just add it directly to as a child of the network manager, you can get the tree and just add it there. I'm going to leave it alone right now. I don't think it's causing any problems, but if it ends up causing problems, then we can come back and adjust that later. Okay, and so now that we've got our loading screen, we need to actually connect or start a host in this case. So we need a eNetwork reference to the eNet network. Let's just preload that one as well. And I think it's right there. All right. Because I know this is going to be a multiplayer game, I'm okay to preload this. I'm not going to have a single player mode. Right. So that's okay if I just want to load this ahead of time so that when we're ready, we can just immediately connect to it. Yeah, I think what we can do is actually just, we'll preload it and then down here we'll instantiate it. I don't think we'll need a global reference to that. But then I want to add it to the scene because our network actually needs to be able to have access to it. Or I'm sorry, our network, our eNet network will actually need to have access to that. And I think I also want to build a scene for that. So let's have a network folder down here in under our scenes. And then let's just add in that a new scene for eNet network. And that's, I think we can just save that as a node. Let's just do create server peer, and this will be var eNet network peer. And this is a multiplayer peer. Again, these are the high level APIs, eNet network multiplayer peer dot new. And we'll basically do the same thing for each, for the client as well. Except we're not going to create a server. Whoop. So we can take this guy and we're going to do create server. Did I mess something up earlier? Oh, I did it again. I I keep doing this. So I loaded a script. I gotta load a scene. Dummy. Okay, and then go to eNet network. There we go. And there. Got it. Now, this is still not going to autocomplete. Still doesn't like me. And I think we need a port here. So server port, let's just create that up here. I know we'll, for now, we're just going to hard code this to something. You could make this dynamic, but that's a little out of scope for this. So I'm not going to really touch on that. This is just a getting started multiplayer template. And then your local IP 127.0.0.0. That should just be localhost. And your client will need to connect to that. So let's see, it should be, oh, there we go. I had a space there. And let's just do a similar thing, but down here. So this create server is creating the actual network server that you are making available for clients to connect to. So when you use this locally on your own computer, it's just going to start with a port. And if you deploy this to some cloud provider or some hosting provider somewhere, like let's just say you build a Linux dedicated server, and when you run this, it's going to start the application, the game server application, and this network server is going to start in that game on that same port. So I guess if you wanted to run multiple games on a single Linux instance, you could like change the port per instance of your game server, that is. But that is way out of scope for this. So let's just move on. Down here, we're going to create a create client. There we go. You're going to create a client, and then you don't really need an IP for your server because it's just the IP is given by whatever its host is, the Linux server that it's deployed on or your local machine. So the create client, though, it needs to know where to connect to, right? So this is the client that you ship to in your game itself. So this is what gets ran on the game. So I don't like the idea of keeping these in the same file, only because this is you're never ever going to need this on the client. Like you'll never need that to be on the client. So I guess if you really wanted to, when you make a client build, you can exclude certain folders. So we could actually split this out into like e-network server and e-network client. And then you can just exclude the servers for your client build, and then you can exclude the client for your server build, because why ship extra stuff on your server that you don't need? But for this quick demonstration here, I'm not going to do that. Let's just create another client here, and we're going to connect to the address, which is just going to be the server IP, and then the port, which is just the server port. Yeah. And in production, I guess if you wanted to ship your game, you would have to have some kind of endpoint. I guess you could hard code your server IP, the DNS of your server. That's nice for development, but if you're actually going to ship this for production, that you should probably have some kind of, what do they call that? Like discovery service. So you would hard code the DNS, or maybe your game has a game launcher, and then your game launcher can talk to your game and it would provide it the IP that you should be connecting to. If you don't have a launcher and you don't care, you can definitely hard code the DNS of your server. But if you're trying to scale your game and you need multiple instances of the game server itself, that's going to get a little complicated, and I'm not going to really I'm not going to touch on that at all. But you might want to have you would probably just put in a like discovery DNS. That is some service that you have that would tell all the individual running instances of your game server, where to actually connect to, or your game client, like game client you would have a discovery service endpoint, like a DNS endpoint that it could query. And the only thing that job is just to return the IP address that you should actually connect to. So you could do all that, and you can, asynchronously chain those calls together here to do that. But for now, for this quick getting started demo, I'm not going to do that because that's way out of scope. And what I want to do here. Okay, so let me just, so we have our server connected or created, and we have our client created. And but we don't have our callbacks or anything, and I don't want to do that in here. I want this to kind of just be these two things. So we need another way to set up the like on client connected so that your server can handle like spawning players in the world and that kind of thing. So, I totally just forgot one last thing. So once you create the server, though, you have to inform the underlying multiplayer APIs that this is the server that you just created that you want to run. So in order to do that, you just make a call to multiplayer, and you set multiplayer peer equal to the peer we just created. And it will at that point know that you have a server up and running that you wish to, have running on that Godot instance. So that's all we need to do, and we just do it for both. We do the exact same code. It's really it's pretty much identical except for this line right here. That's going to be it for the eNet network, and I think at that point we can move on from that. I'm actually going to close it because I don't think we need it up anymore. And down here we instantiate that file, and we're going to add the eNet network to the game. So it's going to be this scene. So you'll see that scene tacked into here above that. Underneath the network manager, right? Because network manager will be a node in there. So we're going to add that to the game. We need to make a call to that eNet network that we just created. So so we add it to the scene, and then we need to make a call to it now that it's there. And then we'll say create, what did I call it? Server peer, I think was it. I didn't close it. It's right there. Yeah. So create server peer. And then we'll just call the same thing for the join. We can basically just copy this down here, and then instead of a create server peer, we'll create a client peer, and then we will be able to connect to that respective server. And this is just going to be locally on my own computer, so it's not going to be anything more complicated than that. And I think we can test, because we move to we're going to call host game, and we're going to have our loading screen up, and then we're going to show that loading screen, and then we're going to load in the network. And then once the network creates the client, we can actually hide. I think we can hide them. Yeah, I think I approached this a little differently. So I want to make sure. I don't think these errors are relevant anymore. Okay. Yeah, so this will create the server, and then so let me try to see if that'll work, because I think if we have our network here, our network manager calls set up correctly. So on one debug instance, we'll call this one the host game, and it should call host game press and set that up. Let me try it out. Wow, that took forever to load. Okay, so host game. Oh, nope. What's going on? Active network. It's saying I don't actually have that. So did I not? So I initialized the eNet network scene, which is this guy. I guess I got to attach the script. Yeah, I guess I got to attach the script. That would probably help. Okay, easy fix. Okay, so show loading. Okay, that's fine, because this is like our server, but it's going to be our player 1, 2, and then we can join the game, and then show loading. And I guess I don't know if it connected because I don't have any callbacks, but it didn't throw any errors. So I guess we have a network set up. We're going to get into that in a second. But what I want to do is create a multiplayer manager script that kind of exists within the game that's part of the scenes. And the reason why I want to do that is because it gives us, I like to keep the network stuff over here in this scene, because eventually what we'll do is you may want to, like I said earlier, have a Steam network and all that set up here, and switching between that can happen here. I did have another video where I show all that, and you can stick all that logic here. But then on the other end of this, you have callbacks for when clients connect and disconnect, and adding them to the game. You're not in the network layer anymore. That's more like the game layer. You're like managing the players in the game. And so I like to make a node or a scene for that called multiplayer manager and put everything in there. So let's go ahead and look at what that's going to look like. So we'll go down to scenes, and I guess under network, we can just add it there for now. And if you don't like this organization, you can always change it later. So let's create a scene. And it's a node. We can just create a node. And of course, let me just add a script to it. And we'll just name it the same thing, but stick it under the scripts folder. And I'll just stick it under network as well. So multiplayer manager will go there. and this will be a node. And we're not going to make this an autoloader. This is just going to be its own thing. And we don't need the eNet network open anymore. So let's close that. And I don't think I need a main menu open either. So we can close that as well. All right. So now that we have this multiplayer manager, let's add it to our game scene. And when he gets ready, he's going to do some setup. Oh yeah, before we need to add I want to add a variable in here that's, because this is our autoloader, this can be like a global accessible network status kind of thing. And if there's anything that you want to track, like, is this a host mode? Like, does your server instance need to know if this is host or not? Like, is he going to have a client and that sort of thing? So is it going to be a host, meaning is it a server and a client? So I like to add a flag for that, because whether you're hosting as a server or as a standalone server or as a typical host where there's a client, you need to be able to add callbacks so that you know when a client connects and disconnects. So we don't need to set that up for clients, but we do need to set that up for servers. So again, we can split this out into multiple different files and have like server manager setup or multiplayer server or multiplayer client. If you are going to publish your game and you're going to do this for production, I kind of recommend doing that, because I don't think you should be really giving your server code to the clients. Security through obscurity and obfuscation is a really important factor. I should say important strategy for those things. So for now, let's just create a variable, and we're going to call it is hosting game. And I think we're just going to set it to false. And if you hit host game, we're going to set that to true, because you're hosting a game, right? So back in our multiplayer manager, what we can do is detect whether or not we want to add those on ready callback, or those on peer connected callbacks. So if our network manager, because we have an autoloader now, we can reference it anywhere, is hosting game. So we'll do multiplayer dot peer connected, and then we'll do dot connect, and then we need to create a function here that's client connected. We'll create that in a second. Peer disconnected. So this is like whatever cleanup you want to do when one of your clients connected to the game disconnects. So let's just call it client disconnected, and let's create those respectively. And again, I like to do the underscore because I want to show that this is a private internal function to this script. And I think we get a network ID passed in, and I believe that is an int. So let's also note what connected. And then let's kind of duplicate that for client disconnected. I believe it's the exact same thing. Connect. Oh, you see what I did? That's funny. CONN, two N's. I put disconnected instead of connect. That's funny. Okay. And in the term when you, I guess, so I'm thinking ahead, if I want to put this in some cloud service somewhere or host it somewhere, if you're you have to detect that, right? So let's see, if when our game loads, it's going to load this main menu scene, and whether it's on the server or not. And you can also create a separate build for your server, but let's do ready. And what I want to do is, in the case that you are going to have a dedicated server build, you need to be able to automatically call to this host game. And then your host game can just set up the standalone server as if somebody pressed that host mode, but no one's going to be on your server to do that. So you need to be able to call to those server setup functions automatically. So if we are I think it's has feature, yeah. And then if it's dedicated server, we're just going to automatically call to host game. And I like to put a little note in there so that when I launch my game on my server, I can see like calling host mode. Like all over the place. What am I doing? And then once host game I'll see host game get hit, and then I'll know that, you know, it's going to try to hide. It's a little weird to do it this way because you're like hiding panels that aren't there, right? Because that stuff's going to be stripped out. So when you do this for production, you can create a separate path that maybe you have a scene. Maybe you have a whole other implementation or a whole other game project if you want to separate it that way. But if you don't, you could probably have a separate scene that does a quick check, like, am I a client or am I a dedicated server? And so you don't have to do it under this main menu. You could probably have just a scene that comes before that, like start game scene, that does a quick couple checks, and then you can have a whole separate scene and just bypass the main menu scene altogether and go to like main dedicated server scene, and then that way you don't have to piggyback on the, you know, the main menu scene like I'm doing here. But I'm just trying to do a really quick template, and those kinds of little things you're gonna have to decide as you build out your game. That's not really for me to do that. So because I'm allowing the main menu to call to, or to I guess establish that it's going to call to this network manager host game. Because we're going to do all that, we're going to actually, hold on, let me just make sure. Yeah, we're gonna have to go to that. Yeah, okay. I was like trying to talk to something and I wasn't quite there yet, but that was the other thing I'm missing. So we're gonna have to repeat this for each, for both host game and for dedicated server setup. So that's why I have this like that. Yes. Okay. So this is the exact same thing. So you have your host, and it's going to be exactly same as the same path as if you had a dedicated server, but no one's going to be there to click host game. So that's why we do this. We're going to just kick off the same host game that's going to set up your server on your dedicated server build running somewhere. And then it's going to automatically go to our main menu scene, or our game scene, which in turn, this ready function will get hit, right? But because it happens for both when someone clicks host mode and for when your dedicated server gets ran, we also need to add a check in here to make sure that we're not running a dedicated server. Because if we're a dedicated server, we don't want to add a player. So let's just do a check if not, meaning if we're testing locally, it's the exact same thing I just did a second ago, dedicated server. So if we're not a dedicated server and we're running in host mode, we typically want to add a player. And that player ID is going to be 1. So what we'll do is create another function down here. I don't think we'll need the process function. And we'll just call it add player to game and network ID int and adding player to game. And let's just do a quick little debug there. So we have our bearings when we're debugging. And that will be called only if we're not on a dedicated server. So that's what we're trying to do there. Hopefully that makes sense. And at this point, I think we're ready to hide our loading screen, because we've got the player added into the game. We've got our server created and set up. And because this is checking if it's hosting a game, it's not going to be called on client. This is only going to be called on our server setup. All right, I'm going to cover really quick what I did. So, so we have our multiplayer client connected lifecycle here. So the client's going to connect, and we're just going to add them into the game. This is going to be for the really basic functionality. So this is just for template purposes, just to get our players to show up. There might be a lot of additional setup actually, depending on what your game requirements are here. But for this game, for this template, we're just going to we're going to spawn them into the world. Maybe they maybe you're going to have different, maybe you're going to have a saved point in the world or the map or wherever they are, or spawn points that you want to refer to. So we're just going to say adding or add player to game, or I should say spawn player in game. And that's going to happen once they connect. So they're going to connect, they're going to establish that connection. You can do some authentication in this process in between. I'm not going to show that today, but that's another thing that could happen in this multiplayer manager. You can add all that if you'd like. There's probably a chance that you can do that in the network manager, but we might even be able to break that up into its own file. But again, I don't want to touch on that too much because, I'm not going to touch on that because we're not going to do that for this. So. And then, of course, when the player disconnects, we're going to hit that client disconnect, and then we're going to remove them from the game. So these are the, actionable functions that are going to occur once these life cycles are these life cycle functions get hit. So then we're just going to remove player. All right, respectively. We have the player connected, I should say the peer or client connected to the game. Now, like I said, this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to just add them to the game here. So in order to do that, we need to create a player scene, which we have right here with our little capsule guy. And what we'll do is let's get a reference to that player scene. And I think we could create it here. Yeah, I think I'm going to just put it here. So let's just create an internal variable. And let's find our player scene. Make sure I actually selected scene this time. All right. And then, so we're going to add them, or instantiate. We're going to instantiate them. So player to add. Don't need that. Oops. All right. So we're going to have that player to add, and we need to set the name to the network manager, but we're going to use the string version of it. So let's just take the string and the network ID. This really helps with authority, and we'll touch on that more in a minute, but this is sort of a standard that I've been seeing used in identifying players or clients or peers that are connected to the server, is to just take the network ID and set it to the name. And this allows us to do specific checks, and maybe you only want to act on a player's version or a player instance of their, character on a different machine. And you want to check, like, are we on our local machine? So that you could actually check your current, right? You can get the multiplayer dot, there it is. So like you could compare, is your network ID the same as this, or is the player's dot name equal to the unique ID? And you can do those checks in some cases throughout your game if necessary. And you could set this to another, I guess, variable, but it allows us, when you set it to the name is set immediately and it's spawned with the name. And we need to be able to set authority up. And if we don't put in the name, it can become a little challenging to correctly set up and get the authority set up correctly. And again, I can touch on that in a minute, but just for now, I think it's safe to say that, set the network ID to the player that you want to add's name is a good way to go. And another thing I like to do when adding players is have a ready player function. And I think you can really build this out based on whatever your requirements are. So if for example, you need to like reset their positions or maybe reset their health or something like that, if it's kind of a match-based game, or if you want to set their position to something like you want to call to the database, you could set up some asynchronous calls to pull in that information. But I like to put it in its own function so that once you do need to build out your game from this template, you kind of have an idea of what that flow would look like. So what I like to do is just pass in the player. So we can say player. And I don't think I created a player script yet, or let me see if I did. I didn't create a player script yet. So let's see. It's probably time that we do that. So let me just grab it. Let's do a new script player, and then we'll just stick it under these scripts. Yeah, that should be fine. And then it creates us the standard motion movements, which is really nice, to be honest. And the reason why I do that is because I want to do class name player, and we'll just leave that open for now. And down here, well, we know that this player will work correctly. The type that we're declaring for the parameters for that function. Okay, so what we can do is say player dot position equals to, for now, let's just create a random vector around the origin of the world. So I think we can just say random, what do I want to do? I guess random integer. Wait, actually, let's do random integer range. And so we'll do a range for X and Y between 1 and 5. Actually, let's do -5 or -2, 2. And that's going to be for our X. And then for our Y, we're just going to spawn them like in the air. And then we're going to do the same thing for Z. And I think I need to say a 3 there. So that's X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be our player's position. And that's we're going to instantiate them, set their position. And then I think at that point we're ready to add them to the game. But we need to add them to a specific reference, which is going to be our player spawn point. Let me just, it's node 3. And I also want to export this. And what we can do is in our game, actually, how do I want to do that? I think what we need to do is, why is it complaining? Oh, no, not node 3, node 3D. So I think we need to set this in our manager. Yeah. Okay. So that's right. All right. Sorry. I just had to get my bearings. So we do have our multiplayer manager, and it's going to be in the same scene where our world is and where we're going to spawn our map and we're going to spawn our player. Hopefully I can figure out that map spawn stuff. I don't think I've done that. I did it for an earlier example, but I just don't want to take up too much time. So we're just going to drag it over. No. Yeah. No, wait. What did I just? Yeah. Okay. So we have our multiplayer manager, and we're just going to drag over the player spawn point. And that's going to work out perfect. So the multiplayer manager now has a reference to that. So they're going to ready the player. And then we're just going to do whatever you need to do to ready the player. And then we're going to add the child to that node. And I think I'm ready to add the multiplayer spawner. Yeah, before we do that, I also want to capture our players in the game. So let's create a variable players in game, and that's going to be a dictionary. You can do this a couple different ways. For now, I'm just going to approach it this way. And what I'm going to do is by network ID, so players in game dot, let's do it by, the integer. So network ID. So like the dictionary is going to be like their network ID integer, and then we're going to get a reference to them. So we can, our multiplayer manager can track who's in the game. Right. So when this is like your server, or whether it's dedicated server or a host, that server is going to track. This isn't going to be on the client. This is going to be on the server. So it's going to track the available players in the game. So if we add a player to the game, we also need to remove them when they leave. So we need to go down to the remove player function. We need to build that out. And let's do a check if player, did I copy that? If players in game has this network ID, right? So if we actually, somehow we didn't mess something up, if we actually have that player, we should probably put in a warning there just in case like that, you know, in the real world, if something got messed up. But so we're going to do player to remove equals players in game. And we're going to grab the by network ID. If player remove, whoops. Player remove is good. Then let's queue free them. And we're going to erase them to get them out of the game. And I think that's what we need to remove them. So we're just removing them. Whoops, that's not right. Sorry. Yeah, so erase just removes them out of that dictionary, and queue free just gets them and clears them out of the game. I think we can call remove. Actually, no, I don't think we need to do that. I think we can just queue free them out of the game and then remove them from our dictionary list. So those are the two callbacks that will happen. And I think so we added our child. So now we need to create a multiplayer spawner. So up here, I'm going to create a thing called, it's going to be multiplayer spawner. So this is going to spawn our player. So let's say player spawner. Okay, I think it's probably a good idea to move these up top. And the spawn path will be the player spawn path, player spawn point or whatever. Leave it to 0 so we don't have a limit. And we're going to add an element for detecting scenes that we want to auto spawn. So if it detects a player scene, get added here. So if our server adds it, right, I've been over this a million times, but if you're still unfamiliar, if you haven't seen this, when you add the player to that spawn point right here, this multiplayer spawner will detect that you did that and synchronize it throughout all the clients. So that's the really basic way to do that. And I think we can test this. Let's just make sure. It's just going to fall through the earth. So this is our host. I have a error there. So I have a host and I don't see anything. But if we check our remote tab, that'll give us a hint, because obviously the guy's gray and the background's gray and there's no world. So we're not going to see anything. But if we look down here, we do see we do see that the host client's there, but we have a problem because the second person didn't actually join. Not sure why they didn't get added. I think maybe because did I not set it up? Join game. Yeah, it's totally not happening correctly. So what's happening here? Let me try to about what's going on. So we're adding player to game, and I keep doing that. I keep doing comma instead of %. Yeah, see, I did it correct down there. So we hit adding player to game, and we readied the player, and it added the child to this spawn point, and we saw that. So we know the one player got in correctly, but we saw him load correctly. But then the second player came in, and it probably. Oh, I think there was a trick. Yeah, there was like an order of raise condition. I think I need to do a get tree and wait a frame. And I think we need this to enable the callbacks to get established. gonna be funny. I had that in the back of my mind the whole time. So we host game, and then let's see. Oh man, I thought for sure that that would do that. Yeah, our client connected callback isn't getting hit. If I, yeah, these callbacks are not correctly loading. Oh, I know. I know why. Somebody else did this, and I can't believe I just did it. It's not 0, it's 1. Oh man. So if you tuned in earlier, you're probably gonna mess this up. It's 1. Oh man. I hope nobody watches this and does this. No one's gonna watch this, but whatever. So we'll host game and we'll join this client, and there we go. That was it. Yeah. Client connected. You can see the network ID, and that's now we have a multiplayer game. This is kind of a good stopping point. I think this gives us the full circle of you've created a, let me just kind of walk through it. So we have our main menu, host game, join game, that will load in our game scene, and we get we've got a multiplayer manager scene that handles adding the players and removing the players from the game, and tracking the players that are actually in the game, and that's kind of stuck in the top of our game scene. And then we've got our player spawn point, which the player spawner will spawn the player and synchronize through all the clients. And then while I do that, let's actually rerun that really quick. And I know you can't see any players because I don't have a map or anything, but just we're going to do that in a second. Let's just double check both players there. Oh, look at that. Okay, so both players are in the game. And that is and to tell if this is the host or not, like without trying to figure out which session, like was it this one or this one, right? You can't see me pointing, but is it this one or this one? You just go to our eNet network. The network manager is hosting game. So if we're not hosting game, then that's our client. So I think this is our client. And this is our host who has a server running and also has a client, meaning not a client, but meaning has a player. So that's going to be session 2. And you can confirm with selecting a network manager, he is the host. And then we should also see both players, and we do. All right, so we know that our spawner is working and we've got players in both games. So before I do anything else, before I spawn in a map, let's just add a quick mesh static body. And I think we can add collision shape. So I want to add a plane mesh, and I think I always forget the order of operations for that. So here's a plane mesh, and let's just make it 50 by 50. That's way too big. Let's do 10 by 10. And up here, you can create a static body, create tri-mesh static body from it, and it creates the collision detection and enables the collision detection for that. So you can spawn in a character and run around on that. So let's look at doing that. And of course, it's not working because we don't have a camera. So we need to go to our player. And for now, we'll just add a placeholder camera. We're not going to leave it like this. I'm going to create a spring arm and that sort of thing. I think this is what we want. Yeah, let's try that really quick. And the automatically active. Yeah, yeah, I think we're going to have to adjust that manual or in our code. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so you can't see them because they're the same color, but that's one player. And then if we join with the second player, you can see he spawned in there, and it's not showing. I think he missed the map. I think he might have missed the map. Where's the world? Yeah, node. Sorry, I'm like doing two things at once in my head. Node 3, and I'm also on stream, so I'm like atmosphere, and we'll just kind of bring that up there, and let's just add a light. It's directional light. I don't ever remember seeing that arrow. Is that a new thing? All right, and let's try to see if that helps a little bit. So if I host game, should drop me in. Yeah, look at that, much better. And then we're using our arrow keys for now. I think the other guy just fell off the edge of the map. So that's our host. If we join game, it looks like he got launched up in the air or something. Yeah, okay. I know what's happening. So I don't have any authority or anything set like that right now. So our guys are just kind of on the server side, they're both being controlled exactly the same. They're not being synchronized on the client because we're not synchronizing position or anything, but we know that we have 2 different players spawned in the game, and we will fix the authority issue so that you can control them individually and set up some controllers for that. But at this point, you have a players being spawned in the game, and the next thing I want to do before we get to the player is spawn in the map. So underneath our multiplayer manager script, we need to spawn the map. So like right here, we're spawning the player, but we need to actually spawn the map. So spawning the map is going to be synchronized to all the players. I'm just trying to think, do I want to spawn map? Okay, let's not do the spawning map. And the reason is when you ship your clients to your, when you ship the client, right? So when you build your game, if the map is dynamic, for instance, you have like 20 different multiplayer maps or whatever, you build these little contained maps and you would spawn them, or you would first have some matchmaking thing where your players get together and you match them, and then once the match is found, then you spawn in the arena or the level or whatever the map is that you build. So you have all the map nodes in that map scene. And so let's just say level 1. And level 1 will have the environment for level 1 and all those things. And you can, platforms, whatever you have in the map. And then you can spawn it right here in this map point. Well, for this demo, I don't want to do that yet. Let's do that for another stream. Let's say that for another time. And what we'll do for this is let's just assume that it's one open world, so that on the server, it has one world that it's going to synchronize the players on top of. And then when you build the client for your users or your people that are playing the game, those people, you give them that one world as well. It's built into the game, right? So, and of course you can dynamically spawn different places of the map as they like go to different places. That's way out of scope for this, and maybe I do want to touch on that. And I'm not terribly experienced or versed with what that's going to look like in Godot, so I think it would be fun to do and try to experiment with. So if you're interested, keep an eye on the streams, and I'll plan on doing that at some point. But for now, I think we're just going to maintain a single world, and we're not going to spawn in the map. And for now, we just have this like mesh instance, which I want to make a little bit bigger now that I was playing around with it for a minute. So let's just do 20 by 20. And this is a good stopping point for this first stream. Again, this is my first stream that I've been doing, and I plan on doing a bunch more multiplayer streams. But all we did here was we created a main menu. We've got some buttons for host and join. When you click host or join respectively, you're going to either create a so we load the game scene and we put the loading screen up, and then we create a server or you join the server respectively. So you hit host, you see it connect. You saw that loading screen flash really quick because it just happens so fast. And then we establish a player, or actually if we look at our network scene, we created a eNet network scene instance, which is this scene here, and it just creates our server and client respectively. And you can do your whole multiplayer game with this if you'd like. You can totally use these high-level networking APIs. And you do have access to the lower level network with this. I didn't touch on that today, but I'm going to just focus on the high-level APIs for now and just see like how far we can get with that. Anyway, so we've got our eNet network established, and I've added the eNet network to the scene so that we can, have access to that current game scene that we're running. I think there's some important reason. Well, I guess you won't be able to access certain things if we don't do that, like the multiplayer, this multiplayer object. You won't be able to access that unless it's in the scene. So that's why we add it to the scene. And once it's added to the scene, it's ready to go. And we we've set up our server or client respectively. And then we have our network manager hide the loading screen. And when you actually hit host, it's going to subsequently call, or is it under the network manager? Sorry, when you hit host, we're going to create our server and our client respectively, depending on, if you hit those buttons. And then once that's complete, we'll have those things established. And then our multiplayer manager, which is part of our game scene, will take over, and he sets up the callbacks on the server. So if we're in a host mode, we're going to set up the callbacks for appear, disconnected, or connected, I should say, or disconnected. And when they connect, for this simple example, we just add them to the game with this code, and we ready the player with this. And then once they leave the game, we also track them in a dictionary. There might be a better way to do this. For now, I just thought it was really easy to track the players by network ID in a dictionary. So if you want to experiment, go ahead and do that. And then what we'll do is we add them to the game. And because we have a multiplayer spawner here set to this player spawner point, they're going to automatically spawn in the game and be synchronized. And we can see that here. That player gets launched in the game because I don't think we're synchronizing anything. So we can just ignore that. And we don't have any controls on that client yet because I haven't established or separated the authority. We're going to look at that in a different video, or I guess a different session. And I'm not sure why I just fell through. That's actually really funny. I wasn't expecting that, but I think it has something to do with the collisions maybe. I don't want to let that happen again. Yeah, anyways, I haven't synchronized positions or anything. I wonder if I turn on the synchronizer, it'll do that. But anyway, so we have a basic network setup. You can start your multiplayer game from this point. I'm going to build out this template a little bit more, so it'll make a lot more sense. This was just the basic character controller inputs using the arrow keys, and we're going to set up the player, I think, in the next one I think I want to do. And we're going to maybe build out a more substantial map. I don't know. We'll see, because I want this to be like a template starting point that you can, keep reusing to build out your basic games, or to make quick prototypes with, and just kind of have something to get up and running that's not too complex. But I'm going to add in some models from some asset provider, and it'll make this look a little nicer, and we'll add some animations and that sort of thing. So we've got our basic network set up and working, and we'll look at synchronizing and fixing anything that I might have missed in this video in the next one. All right, well, I'm going to end stream now. Thanks for stopping by, and see you next time.